Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today I will be speaking about how I implemented a multi-branch pipeline with Argo Workflows and how I debugged a small contribution that make it possible, and also an open source project that came out of it. So a little bit about myself. My name is Gosha. I'm a senior DevOps engineer at Rookout. Married and a huge fan of hiking. So all started when we decided to give our developers the freedom on shifting left and give them the ability to choose which tools they want to use for our CI/CD pipeline. We are great believers on shifting left and on developers' first approach. So we decided to give our developers all the freedom to decide which CI/CD tools they want to use. At first, it was great. Everybody was very pleased of it. And over time, it became a huge mess. We had multiple of CI/CD platforms to manage the pipelines. And over time, it's became a huge mess. There was one service that actually started with Jenkins, then triggered Circle CI for tests, then waiting for it to end. And after all of that, actually triggered GitHub Actions just to create release notes. So it was too much difficult to maintain it, and it was very hard for new developers to onboard quickly. And each time they needed to do a huge reverse engineering of the pipeline just to find where it defined. So we decided to consolidate our CI/CD tools. You, of course, already can guess which tool we have chosen, but it wasn't that simple to choose which tool to use for our CI/CD pipelines. Our developers had a lot of experience with all those CI/CD tools. The expectation from new tool was very high, and of course, the requirements too. There's a lot of pros and cons for each of those CI/CD tools, and the only request that came from DevOps team is actually to make it a Kubernetes native tool to integrate fully to our ecosystem. So there is not much Kubernetes native CI/CD tools. So we started with Argo, and this is how my journey as a developer experience product manager started. Actually, I wanted to research how to research the developer experience. And I've read a lot of articles about how to do it, and all of them just talked about to get product market fit. So for me, actually, product market fit was happy developers. That was my metric. That's what I was monitoring to see if I'm reaching this goal or not. So much before implementing anything, I decided to use lean software development. It's actually iterative process that solving some it's a product optimization problem that you want actually to put a least effort you can to get the maximum accuracy on your decision which CI/CD tool to use. So okay, so much before implementing anything, I decided to perform a quick demonstration to our developers with Argo Workflows and actually show them the UI, the usability of it, and how it's managed. And there was my first immediate feedback. It actually doesn't support multi-branch pipeline. So multi-branch pipeline actually very basic feature for CI/CD tools that all of our different platforms, Jenkins, Circle CI, GitHub Actions natively supports it. And I use it too every day. And I was that much hypnotized from Argo Workflows that I didn't realize it's missing a multi-branch pipeline. So a little bit about what it is. So basically, a multi-branch pipeline gives you the ability to shift left and to manage the configuration of the pipeline on your source code repository. And even each of your branches going to have its own pipeline configuration. So it makes it easier to maintain those pipelines because it's sandboxing them for each of the pipelines. And so you can code review each other, run this pipeline much before to test if it works. So it's helped the DevOps team too to maintain those pipelines. So my second iteration was actually to ask the developers how they use multi-branch pipeline. Even though it was widely used, they used a lot of different tools. So I had multiple interesting feedbacks, like they hate long YAMLs. Much of them prefer programming interfaces, others prefer declarative interfaces. And after a while, back and forth talking to the developers, actually this was my MVP for starting this project. Actually, as you can see here, you see in the left side, you see the .workflows folder. It's actually going to be the API of the multi-branch pipeline with Argo Workflows. That's going to have, at the start, a main YAML file, parameter file that's going to be global values, and template YAML actually just holds the templates. So it separates the long YAML to different YAMLs, and it makes it easier to maintain. So actually, what I wanted to implement is that each of those branches in the source code repo are going to have those folder in files. And the end goal was to create a CRD, a custom resource definition, at the Kubernetes cluster where the Argo Workflows controller lives, and then he will do the heavy lifting for me. So for that, I choose to use Argo events. A quick explanation, not accurate at all, about Argo events. It's actually one of the Argo stack tools that helps you to get a webhook and then create a custom resource definition. It's much more complicated than that, but actually it is the end goal of that. So the webhook passing through the sensor, that the sensor is going to create Argo Workflow CRD. So how it works? Actually, from the source code repository, a webhook sent to the repo sensor. Then it will create a workflow CRD that will manipulate the webhook that we just got. Then download this .workflow folder, create a new workflow out of it. So we need another sensor to listen for that. We call it seeder sensor. It will seed our workflows. And then it will finally submit the CRD that will represent the multi-branch pipeline in our workflow environment. So I started with the last part of it, with the seeder. I wanted to check if it works, so I just sent this small webhook, and I wanted, if you're not familiar with sensors, so I wanted to take a parameter, this is the destination of it, and this is going to be the end goal of this destination. Actually, I wanted just to inject this, it's JSON, but it's converted to YAML, to the templates, so it will execute it. So this is the workflow that will be created. That's what we expect in the end of it. So we got an unmarshalling error. Actually, I hoped it will go much smoothly, and then I decided to debug this sensor. And my easiest way for that was to use actually Rookout. This is the string that I got with the unmarshalling error, so it's definitely escaping problem of backslashes. So a little bit about Rookout. Rookout gives you the ability to debug live application in a production environment or remote environment without redeploying it, without adding log lines, and then redeploying it again. So it's made easy for me to debug the sensor. So we wanted to place Rookout inside this sensor. For that, a quick instrumentation needed. So At the entry point of the sensors, I actually put it our agent, and I needed to inject environment variables too. So actually, the Argo Workflows, Argo Events controller, going to see the CRD, deploy the new sensor, and it's going to be instrumented with Rookout inside. So it's easier for me to find the bug. So I knew what I'm looking for and where I need to look for it. So I just sent in this webhook again, this payload again, and I found this one. This was the troublemaker. So actually, it was my first contribution to open source. And it was just to switch the function. It set bytes to set raw bytes, little bit new tests, and that's it. And here, this how a new feature at Argo Events came up. Like now you can template the whole block and not only one value of specific key. So I tried it again, and I got another error. I could template one block, but once I wanted to template, it's like actually marshalling a whole struct because of its substruct of a bigger struct. It actually made it much complicated to contribution. So you can template a block, but not all the blocks. If you have a list of those structs, it's a problem. So I came out with new architecture for the Cedar pipeline. So actually, it looks like this. So source code repository will send the webhook to a Cedar sensor. This sensor will submit a workflow that's going to be called Cedar workflow. That this workflow actually will download the .workflows folder and manipulate the CRD and then submit it by itself. So is the end goal of that. A little bit details about that. So the process began with the webhook again, and then we're going to have two sources for our workflow. Actually, a template of the workflow itself. It's not a workflow template CRD, but just a workflow CRD that have all the spec inside, all the default configuration inside. And the other source is actually the branch where .workflows folder lives, and the Cedar workflow actually will fetch it to the workflow and create it. Then it will merge them together. It will take all the files at .workflows, do all the logic, and inject them inside this workflow template, and then, of course, submit it to the cluster, and this is how we're going to have this multi-branch pipeline. So back to our interface to the developers. So we had a .workflows folder that's going to have main YAML, that actually the logic of the pipeline. It will create a DAG inside of it, the directed cyclic graph, global parameters, and the template YAML that's going to populate all the implementation of the steps that we will reference from the main YAML file. So how it works. So we have two sources. From your left, you can see the workflow CRD that will be populated and injected with all the branch configuration, with all these YAMLs. So we're starting with metadata from Git webhook. We'll take from there the user, the repo name, and other labels that we want to. And then we will inject the parameters YAML. It's actually a global, a workflow scope parameters. Inject the templates into templates, so we could be referenced. And actually, it's a local step, so nobody from other repos can't reference those templates. It lives only inside the repo itself, in specific branch. So if you implement new template, you actually can reference it only from your branch. So it's nice to sandbox it from other people. And the main YAML is actually the DAG that will be created and will act as an entry point of all this workflow. So here how it looks. Actually, you can see two workflows. The one called Cedar, the other called I don't know what the name of the repo is. Actually, the repo, then the branch, then some generated string, and this was my second iteration of implementation, and I give it to the developers to use it. I got a lot of feedbacks about this solution, and one of them was that it takes like 10 seconds and it's little bit messy, that you're not sure which seeder is reference which workflow. So you can imagine that we had here a lot of workarounds, and then we decided to take it further, and actually we started an open source project that's called Piper. Piper will, it's actually already, have much simpler workflow. So the source code repo will send a webhook to Piper. Piper will actually get this webhook and then submit the workflow CRD. So it makes it much, much easier. For now, Piper supports GitHub only. Sorry, guys, but I need to start with something. And it now manages all the configuration of the webhook, the secrets, and so on, just when you're providing the token to it. And it's actually, we expanded the interface, and now we have a trigger file that will actually reference all the triggers and all the YAMLs that we're going to use there. And we have a long roadmap, and of course, that all of you are welcome to use it and contribute to it. Here you can find the repo of it. So if you want to scan, it's great. And we actually can create a quick demo of it. Okay, I will come back to this QR later. So I will make it. Okay, sorry. Okay, great. So actually, this is the trigger YAML file. We extended it. Now it actually will populate a list of triggers that you want to trigger inside any logic that you will place inside. So events going to place to hold all the list of the events that you want to execute the pipeline in it. Branches, of course, the branch that will trigger it. On start and on exit actually going to be your entry point and exit handler for your workflow CRDs. So you can place a list of them. So as we had the first feedback of long YAML, now we can separate those YAMLs to how many YAMLs you want, and then reference from each other. Actually, it supports only DAG, and and we don't use steps at all. So if you want anything linear, just make it dependent on each other, and a template YAML that will populate the templates on the workflow, and actually you can reference those things inside. So I will trigger it. It's have a dummy pipeline inside. So we send a webhook, and now we're expecting to see a workflow right here. Here is actually the workflow created, and it's running now in the cluster. It's actually in my local machine, and you can try it locally too. With make deploy, it will create the cluster, everything else with kind, and that's it. Thank you, guys. We have time.
We have some time, some questions. If anyone wants, just raise your hands, and I'll pass the microphone. Just a second. Let's wait for the microphone so the people on the recording can hear as well.
Hi, I wanted to ask, where does the Piper reside?
Sorry?
Where does the Piper sit?
The Piper actually a self-hosted application, so you will deploy it whenever the Argo Workflows controller leaves. It can communicate directly with workflow or create a CRD, but actually you just want to place it whenever the workflows, he need to create CRD, and the workflow need to take this CRD and do the heavy lifting for it.
Okay, so basically it sits where the Argo itself sits.
Yes.
In the cluster.
Yes, but you can configure it how you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is regarding after the flow runs, how do you see the output in your Git repo so that you don't have to every time visit Argo?
Great. So actually, one of the, it's still a blank interface, but one of the features is actually to update the Git status when the workflow finish. It's going to watch the CRD, and when it's updates, take events from Kubernetes, and then update the Git with the API call.
And that does it automatically, or you have to configure it?
It will do it automatically. For now, I have like a workflow step that's doing it, but it's on development.
Cool, thank you.
Questions, anyone? Now's the time. Questions? Yeah, here we go.
Can I replace the webhooks with other inputs for the Argo events and use the pipeline, the piper?
Actually, now it's will unmarshal payload that have specific fields. So actually, you can mock it and send it. Now we have interface only for GitHub, but we can extend it to local Git or something else.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, anyone? Okay, so thank you very much, and he's here if you want more questions. Thank you.